It's 1933. Adolf Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. The world expects a hands-on dictator obsessed with every detail, micromanaging his empire. The reality? Hitler woke up at noon, watched Disney movies until midnight, and hated reading documents. He loved Snow White so much he kept a personal copy. Goebbels gave him 18 Mickey Mouse films for Christmas in 1937. Hitler was delighted. This is the same regime that banned jazz as degenerate and burned books in the streets. But here's what makes this truly terrifying. By the early 1940s, Hitler wasn't just lazy, he was physically incapable of sustained thought. His personal physician injected him daily with powerful painkillers and stimulants to keep him functioning. So, who actually ran Nazi Germany when the dictator was too drugged or too distracted to govern? Martin Bormann controlled who could see Hitler and what information reached him. Heinrich Himmler built the SS into an economic empire that used concentration camp slave labor to generate massive profits for the regime. Joseph Goebbels sold the mythology while the regime radicalized beyond control. Here's how Hitler's laziness created the most dangerous dictatorship in history, precisely because no one was truly in charge. If you want to understand how authoritarian systems destroy themselves from within, hit subscribe, because this channel breaks down the mechanics of power and the cost of chaotic leadership. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, captured it perfectly. His work habits were those of a bohemian artist, not a head of state. Hitler's staff operated under one absolute rule: never wake the Führer. While German factories ran triple shifts building tanks, their leader slept until 11 or noon. When Hitler visited Paris after conquering France in June 1940, he wanted to go up the Eiffel Tower. But he didn't. Why? Because the French resistance had cut the elevator cables. Hitler refused to climb the stairs. So, Hitler conquered France, but he couldn't conquer the Eiffel Tower. His days were completely unstructured. No morning briefings, no daily reports, no scheduled meetings. Lunch started at 2 and often lasted until 4, not working meals, but Hitler's endless monologues about the same topics: the evils of smoking, Frederick the Great, his youth in Vienna. After Stalingrad in 1943, Hitler stopped listening to music. These monologues became the only entertainment in his bunker, hours of repetitive ranting while his staff sat in silence. Then came the films. 2, sometimes 3 movies every night in his private screening room. When the screening ended, often past midnight, Hitler would retire to his quarters where his staff left out a specific cake: Führerkuchen, apple cake with nuts and raisins which he'd devour while the rest of Germany slept. February 5th, 1938, the last formal cabinet meeting. After that, there were no agendas, no minutes, no structured decision-making process. Ministers competed for face time, catching Hitler between films, during walks with his dog Blondie, or during his rambling dinner speeches. This wasn't accidental incompetence. Hitler believed in social Darwinism applied to government. That competition between subordinates produced the strongest results. He deliberately created overlapping jurisdictions where multiple agencies had the same responsibilities. The result wasn't efficiency. It was a race to radicalize, where the most extreme interpretation of Hitler's vague desires won approval. Because Hitler rarely gave written orders. He gave speeches, angry, ideological rants filled with what he wanted but never how to achieve it. Then, he expected his subordinates to make it happen. The men who succeeded weren't the best administrators. They were the ones who understood that brutality was the currency of power. Goebbels, Himmler, Göring, the famous names of the Nazi hierarchy. But by 1943, the most powerful man in Nazi Germany wasn't any of them. It was Martin Bormann. He wasn't charismatic, he didn't command armies, he didn't give speeches. He was Hitler's personal secretary, and that made him untouchable. Bormann understood what the flashier Nazis didn't. Proximity is power. By 1941, every document that reached Hitler's desk went through Bormann first. Every meeting request required Bormann's approval. Every policy proposal was filtered through Bormann's hands. He decided what Hitler saw, and more importantly, what Hitler never saw. Bad news from the Eastern Front. Buried. A minister who annoyed Hitler, blocked from access. By 1943, even Hermann Göring, the designated successor, the founder of the Gestapo, couldn't reach Hitler without Bormann's permission. Göring complained bitterly, but there was nothing he could do. Bormann's genius was his invisibility. He never publicly disagreed with Hitler. He never sought the spotlight. He simply took Hitler's rambling monologues and turned them into official policy. Hitler would rant about dealing with traitors or solving the Jewish question. Vague ideological fury with no specifics. Bormann would issue directives in Hitler's name, filling in the details Hitler never bothered to provide. If something succeeded, Hitler got the credit. If something failed, someone else took the blame. Bormann survived the entire war in this position. When Hitler wrote his final will in the bunker in April 1945, he named Bormann as executor. Not Himmler, not Goebbels, the invisible bureaucrat who controlled the dictator without anyone noticing. While Bormann controlled information, Heinrich Himmler built an empire. When Himmler took command of the SS in 1929, it was nothing. 290 men in black uniforms serving as Hitler's personal bodyguards. By the war's end, the SS had become a parallel state. Nearly 1 million soldiers. Its own intelligence network, its own economy. Most people know Himmler ran the concentration camps. What they don't know is that he ran them as businesses. The SS operated a massive holding company that used concentration camp labor to quarry stone, manufacture porcelain, produce textiles, and bottle mineral water. Private corporations, IG Farben, Siemens, BMW, Daimler-Benz, leased slave labor from the camps. Genocide wasn't just ideology, it was profitable. And Himmler wasn't waiting for Hitler to write detailed orders about the Holocaust. Hitler would rant about the Jewish problem needing a final solution. Vague threats, no logistics. Himmler built the machinery. The Wannsee Conference in January 1942, where the Holocaust's logistics were formalized, wasn't called by Hitler. It was organized by Himmler's deputy, Reinhard Heydrich, to coordinate the competing Nazi agencies all trying to solve the same problem in increasingly brutal ways. There's no document signed by Hitler ordering the extermination of the Jews. There didn't need to be. Himmler understood the system, anticipate the Führer's desires, deliver the most extreme solution, gain more power. Until he misread Hitler's mood one final time. In March 1945, realizing the war was lost, Himmler began secret negotiations with the Western Allies through Swedish intermediaries. He was trying to arrange Germany's surrender behind Hitler's back. When Hitler discovered this on April 28th, the response was instant. Himmler, the architect of the SS empire, the man who controlled the apparatus of genocide, was stripped of every title and marked for arrest. In Hitler's system, there were no rules, only the whims of one man. Hitler's vague orders created a competition among his subordinates. By 1941, 4 different Nazi agencies claimed authority over Jewish policy. The SS, the Reich Main Security Office, the Ministry for Eastern Territories, and the civil administration in Poland. They weren't coordinating, they were competing. Historians call this working towards the Führer. Hitler didn't need to issue detailed orders, he just needed to express a desire, a hatred, a vague goal, and his subordinates would race to fulfill it in the most extreme way possible. Propose something brutal, gain power, hesitate, get sidelined as weak. This created a ratchet effect. Every policy got more radical over time because no one wanted to be the person who wasn't radical enough. Joseph Goebbels obsessively tracked his meetings with Hitler in his diary, noting when Bormann blocked his access or when he had more influence than Göring. Hermann Göring, once the second most powerful man in Germany, was marginalized by the war's end. Not because he failed, but because Hitler grew bored of him. The system wasn't efficient, but it was self-radicalizing, which made it far more dangerous than a structured tyranny. By 1942, Hitler's laziness had another dimension. His personal physician, Dr. Theodor Morell, kept meticulous records of what he injected into Patient A, Hitler's code name. The daily regimen included a prescription painkiller that produces euphoria and severe dependency, a powerful stimulant to combat exhaustion before speeches and military conferences, eye drops and throat swabs containing a topical anesthetic for chronic sinus problems, synthetic hormones for energy. And then there was the digestive issue. Hitler suffered from severe flatulence, and Morell prescribed pills containing compounds used in pest control and toxic plant extracts. Hitler took 16 to 20 of these pills every day. He was slowly poisoning himself. His jaundice and hand tremors in 1944 weren't just from stress. And here's a medical fact that confirms what was once just a schoolyard song. In 2015, historians discovered Hitler's medical records from his 1923 imprisonment at Landsberg. The prison doctor recorded that Hitler suffered from right-side cryptorchidism, an undescended testicle. So the man obsessed with genetic perfection, who built an entire regime around racial purity and the concept of the master race, was hiding his own physical condition. To compensate, he was being injected daily with testosterone extracted from bull testicles. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. The man directing a global war was operating under the influence of powerful medications that impaired judgment, created mood swings, and made sustained rational thought nearly impossible. This explains his increasingly erratic behavior as the war collapsed, his refusal to accept military reality, his rage at generals who suggested retreat, his insistence that willpower alone could reverse Germany's defeats. Hitler's system had no logic, just the interpretation of an incapacitated dictator's vague pronouncements by fanatics competing to be the most extreme. And because Hitler rarely signed anything, there was plausible deniability for the worst atrocities. When the Allies asked who ordered this, the answer was always everyone and no one. Hitler authorized implicitly, his subordinates executed enthusiastically, and the machinery of death ran on its own momentum because no one had the authority to stop it, and no one wanted to try. Nazi propaganda portrayed Hitler as a humble servant who refused a salary and lived simply. The reality was very different. Hitler was likely the richest man in Europe. Mein Kampf became a bestseller by state decree. The government bought copies for every newlywed couple, with royalties flowing to Hitler. He even copyrighted his own face, collecting fees from postage stamps. In 1933, the Munich tax office came calling. They demanded 405,000 Reichsmarks in back taxes for undeclared income. Hitler's response as Chancellor? He ordered the Ministry of Finance to declare him personally exempt from all taxation. The debt vanished. He never paid taxes again. By the war's end, his personal wealth exceeded 1 billion Reichsmarks, roughly $6 billion in today's money. The man preaching sacrifice to a starving nation was secretly a billionaire tax evader. And this wealth enabled his detachment from governance. He could afford to sleep until noon, watch films all night, and avoid the tedious work of running a state, Because the system generated money automatically through book royalties, image licensing, and state-granted exemptions. His laziness wasn't strategy, it was privilege, the privilege of a dictator who could delegate everything except the speeches and the hatred. June 6, 1944. 150,000 Allied troops storm Normandy at dawn. German commanders need Hitler's authorization to release the Panzer Reserves, the only force that can stop the invasion. But Hitler is asleep. He'd stayed up until 3 watching films. His staff won't wake him. By the time he releases the tanks at 4 in the afternoon, Allied aircraft control the skies. The panzers are destroyed before reaching the beaches. Hitler's sleep schedule lost Germany the war in the West on day 1. A lazy dictator isn't inefficient. He's catastrophic. But Hitler's laziness didn't come from nowhere. Before Bormann, before the drugs, before the empire, there was Dietrich Eckart, a poet, playwright, journalist, and anti-Semitic ideologue in Munich after World War I. In 1919, Hitler was an unknown army veteran with extreme views but no refinement, no connections, no polish. Eckart saw potential. He taught Hitler how to dress for bourgeois audiences, how to structure his rage into coherent speeches, how to navigate Munich's nationalist circles. He didn't create Hitler's beliefs, those were already there, but he weaponized them. When Eckart died in 1923, Hitler dedicated Mein Kampf to him. The apocalyptic worldview Eckart promoted, the Jewish conspiracy, the racial struggle, the need for total war, became the foundation of Nazi ideology. Dr. Eduard Bloch was a Jewish physician in Linz who treated Hitler's mother for breast cancer in 1907. Because Bloch had been kind to the impoverished Hitler family and charged reduced fees, Hitler later called him a noble Jew. In 1938, after the Anschluss, Hitler personally intervened to protect Bloch. He was allowed to emigrate to America in 1940 with his savings intact, while millions of others were being deported to their deaths. This wasn't mercy. It was proof that Hitler understood exactly what he was doing. He could make exceptions when he chose to. He could recognize individual humanity when it suited him. Which means the Holocaust wasn't the product of blind hatred or ideology run amok. It was a calculated, deliberate choice. Why does this matter now? Because lazy autocrats remain dangerous, maybe more dangerous than obsessive micromanagers. When leaders govern through vague directives and refuse to create formal processes, subordinates compete to interpret those words in the most extreme way. Loyalty becomes measured by radicalism, not competence. The question isn't whether the leader is a mastermind or a puppet. It's what happens when no one is actually governing. The answer: escalation without limit. You don't need a mastermind to create catastrophe. You just need a lazy tyrant and fanatics willing to fill the void. So, who was the real mastermind behind Hitler's decisions? The answer is no one. And that's what made it so lethal. The contradictions weren't accidents. A regime that banned boiling lobsters alive to prevent animal suffering, while industrializing human murder. That preached genetic purity, while its leader hid his own physical condition. That demanded sacrifice from a starving nation, while its Führer lived as a billionaire who never paid taxes. These paradoxes were the products of a system with no constraints. Only the whims of an incapacitated dictator and fanatics who interpreted vague hatred as permission. Hitler wasn't a genius manipulating events. He was a lazy tyrant who unleashed forces he couldn't control, and the world paid the price. Was this laziness a deliberate strategy to maintain power, or the inevitable collapse of a drugged, incapacitated dictator? If you want to see how power actually works in authoritarian regimes and why they always collapse under their own dysfunction, hit subscribe. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.